Amen. If you will, open up your Bibles to Matthew chapter 22. And we're going to read along all the way through, and then we're going to go through it and look at it and look at some of the verses and see if we can apply them to ourselves. It says, the parable of the wedding feast. And again Jesus spoke to them in parables, saying, the kingdom of heaven may be compared to a king who gave a wedding feast for his son. And he sent his servants to call those who were invited to the wedding feast, but they would not come. Again he sent other servants, saying, verse 4, tell those who are invited, look, see, I have prepared my dinner, my oxen and my fat calves have been slaughtered, and everything is ready. Come to the wedding feast. I don't know if it's in our songbooks right now, but we used to sing a song, come to the wedding, all things are ready. I don't remember all the words, but something like that. Forgive me, I'm not a song leader, obviously. But we're coming to the feast. We're encouraged. And it continues on, verse 5. But they paid no attention and went off, one to his farm, another to his business, while the rest seized his servants, treated them shamefully, and killed them. The king was angry, and he set his troops and destroyed those murderers and burned their city. Verse 8, then he said to his servants, the wedding feast is ready, but those invited were not worthy. Go therefore to the main roads and invite to the wedding feast as many as you find. And those servants went out into the roads and gathered all whom they found, both bad and good. So the wedding hall was filled with guests. Verse 11. And when the king came in to look at the guests, he saw there a man who had no wedding garment. And he said to him, friend, how did you get in here without a wedding garment? And he was speechless. The man didn't know what to say. Then the king said to the attendants, bind him hand and foot and cast him into outer darkness. In that place there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. For many are called, but few are chosen. Let's go back and look at this parable and see if we can understand what Jesus is teaching us. Multiple invitations. I did a little research, and apparently back in ancient times, or several thousand years ago, it was not unusual for someone, especially a king, who was going to have a wedding feast, to send out an initial invitation to those who were going to be invited. And then later there would be a second invitation. And as we see here in our story, our parable from the Bible, there's a third invitation that's sent out. And we read that the king has gone to a lot of work. He says, and he's pleading with them. He says, my oxen, my fat calves have been slaughtered. Everything is ready. Come to the wedding feast. The king, like our Father in heaven, had done so much for the people that he was inviting. That invitation was being extended to them. He didn't want them to miss out on what he had done for them. There's also some, I think, referrals here to, in the time that Jesus gave this, to help people to remember prior history of the Jewish nation when they were in captivity in Egypt for 400 years, and they prayed and they asked God for deliverance, and he sent who? Moses. And Moses led them out of Egypt, parted the Red Sea with God's help, went on to the Promised Land. And what were the people doing a lot of times? Griping, complaining. Well, we had it so much better back in Egypt. We had, this to eat and that and so on. But we think about how the people were back then and what our Father in heaven was trying to do for them. And he even got them to the promised land. But when they got there, what happened? They didn't want to go in. And as a matter of fact, only two, Joshua and Caleb, believed that they could. And later, 40 years later, they did go in to the promised land. And along the way, especially when Moses went up the mount to receive the Ten Commandments, and while he was up there, the people got discouraged. And what did they do? What did they build? What did they ask Moses, his brother Aaron, to make for them? And he told them, take off your gold earrings and so on, and we'll make a golden calf. And they did. And they bowed down and they worshiped the golden calf. The people back then, sadly, like people today, they have idols. They had idols back then. Sometimes today we have our own idols. They're a little bit different, but we need to think about what we're worshiping as we go through this life. And it's interesting about Moses that God was so upset at different times, he was ready to just destroy them and start over. And what does Moses do? Lori, what does it mean when we put our hands together like this? What are we doing? Say again louder. Lori tells us we're praying. Thank you, Lori. Moses was praying for the children of Israel because they were disobedient. They weren't doing the things that they knew that they should do. It goes on to say here, but they paid no attention, and he went off, one to his farm, another to his business, while the rest seized the servants and treated them shamefully and killed them. Is it wrong to have a farm? Is it wrong to have a business? No. In fact, it's expected. That's how you can make a living, provide for your family. But what happens if I have a farm, I used to farm, and I would put the farm ahead of coming to church on Sunday? What have I transferred my values to my farm? Interestingly, yesterday I texted a family to find out if I could stop by and pick up the kids. After a while, I got a text back. It says, we're having a birthday party tonight, and we don't think we can get up early on Sunday morning. Sad to hear that. So it's important for us in this parable to look at where we're putting our values, where we're putting our time, and ask ourselves, do we do that today? Verse 9 and 10. So the king says, go therefore to the main roads, invite to the wedding feast as many as you find. And those servants went out into the roads and gathered all whom they found, both bad and good. So the wedding hall was filled with guests. When Jesus was on the earth, he was Jewish. God's chosen people were the Jews. But in John chapter 4, who does Jesus reach out to? What nationality, what ethnicity is the woman at the well? She's a Samaritan. The ones that are looked down on by the Jewish people and everybody else. Why do you think he would do that? Because the parable says, gathered all whom they found, both bad and good. I can't say for sure, but I know in the story she goes to the well by herself. When traditionally, from what I have seen of women going to get water, when we used to go on vacations in Mexico and you would drive through some of the towns and there was rivers, women were always in groups going to get the water to take back home. So maybe she wasn't held in too high esteem in her community. And yet, what does it say in the beginning of chapter 4? It says Jesus needed to go through Samaria. Do you think he knew there would be a woman coming up to that well that many of the other people, well, they just kind of looked down on her? And as they had a conversation, and it came out in the conversation, because he said, go bring your husband. And she responds to him, and he says, I know you have had 5 husbands, and the one that you're with now is not your husband. he realizes that this woman needs help. She needs somebody to accept her just as she is. And that's what Jesus does. It doesn't matter how many husbands she's had. He accepts her as she is. And that's important because I was talking to my brother the other day. He's a missionary in Brazil. And he was recalling when we were little kids going to church in Mercedes. And we moved to Weslaco, I think when I was 12, he was 10. And he was remembering when we would be in church as little kids, Brother Ryan, one of the elders there, was also the preacher at times. And I didn't know this, but my brother said, you know, I would see Brother Ryan up there in the pulpit giving a lesson, and I thought he was the closest thing to God that there was. And I thought I could never, my brother said, I thought I could never be as good as him. And the thing that we don't know is a lot of times guests, different people, they come into church and maybe they see me up here giving a lesson or BC and they think, wow, I could never be like that person. Or they see some of the sisters here doing things. We have no idea of how people perceive us. And that's why it's important, like Jesus here, like in the wedding, the king said, go out to the roads, bring in everybody, bad and good. Jesus wants everybody to come to the wedding feast that's coming someday. And my point, I guess, as I was saying a moment ago, is when people come to church, reach out to them, encourage them, ask them a question. Hey, I like the shirt you got on. Did you pick that out or did your wife get it for you? Most of the guys tell me, my wife picked that out for me. So we never know how the conversation is going to go, but it's good to make people feel at home. What happens with the Samaritan woman? 180 degrees. As we read the story, she's saying in her conversation, I've heard that there is a Messiah. Jesus replies to her, I who speak to you am he. Does she make a change in her life? She leaves her water jug right there, 180 degrees back to the little pueblito that she came from, or city that she came from, community. She goes and tells the people over there, I met a man who told me everything I've done. Could this be the Christ? And what happens? The people in that city, I want to say from what I recall, about half of the people there, they come out to see who this is. Many people came to know who is Christ. Let's keep coming on down. Verse 11. But when the king came in and looked at the guest, he saw there a man who had no wedding garment. And he said to him, Friend, how did you get in here without a wedding garment? The man was speechless. Then the king said to the attendants, Bind him hand and foot, cast him into the outer darkness. In that place there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. For many are called, but few are chosen. My daughter was in college in Waco, probably 20 plus years ago. She had a roommate that was Muslim, and she got invited to the wedding that their family was going to have. They provided a wedding garment for her to wear. So if she was going to go to that wedding, she had to wear that wedding garment, which she did. It was a beautiful garment. I did a little research again, and weddings in ancient times and garments, and from what I was able to find, that it was a custom back in those days, if someone of importance, say like a king, was going to have a wedding for, in this case, his son, he provided wedding garments for all of the guests. One of the reasons that I read was that so whoever came to the wedding, rich, poor, however, they were clothed in a garment. So it didn't allow for people to see who the rich people were, the poor people, the important, the non-important. Everybody appeared to be the same. You were expected to wear that wedding garment if you were going to attend the wedding. And so we have a reason and understanding why the king is so amazed here that this one man showed up at the wedding and he doesn't have his garment on, because it didn't cost him anything. All he had to do was make a choice to put his wedding garment on so that he could be at the wedding. I would like to turn over to Revelations for a moment and read a couple of verses out of chapter 19. Revelation chapter 19, starting in verse 6. Then I heard what seemed to be the voice of a great multitude, like the roar of many waters, and like the sound of mighty peals of thunder, crying out, Hallelujah, for the Lord our God, the Almighty reigns. Let us rejoice and exult and give him the glory, for the marriage of the Lamb is come. What do we know from reading this? There's a marriage that's going to be taking place. Who is the bridegroom? Christ. Who is the bride? The church. Who is the church? Those who have answered the invitation that is extended. And his bride has made herself ready. It was granted her to clothe herself with fine linen, bright and pure, for the fine linen is the righteous deeds of the saints. Righteous. That comes from the word right, doing something right. What is the right thing that Jesus wants us to do? He wants us to hear the invitation that's extended and respond to that invitation. I got a lesson on that recently. I was invited about 8 weeks ago to a wedding. And the day of the wedding, I figured, I'm 74 years old. I can just, dress casually, walk in the back, sit in the back of the church. Nobody's going to notice me there. I'll enjoy the wedding. When the ceremony's over, I'll get up and I'll walk out. Nothing to it. And I was walking out the door of my house, and this little voice said, look at the invitation. Look at the invitation. Now, I got the invitation out, and the invitation said, please wear black formal attire. I had on my starched blue jeans and an iron country and western shirt. Sorry, folks, that's not black formal attire. I go back to my closet, I get out my black pants, coat, tie. By then I'm running a little bit late. I get to the wedding location, park my truck, gentleman comes up in a golf cart, picks me up, drives over past several buildings to a wedding hall where the wedding is taking place. Get off the golf cart, start walking over. 2 young men out there, very appropriately dressed in formal wedding attire. They open the door, I walk in. I'm already late, so I'm already feeling embarrassed about that. Fortunately, God provides, and the next to the last row, there was an empty seat next to the aisle. Zoom, I just sat down right there. I looked around the wedding hall. Everybody there, kids included, black formal attire. And I thought, oh my goodness, if I had showed up in blue jeans and a country and western shirt, I would have stuck out like a sore thumb. The groom, he was handsome. The bride, she was radiant, beautiful. It was like a wedding out of Hollywood. The minister conducted the wedding ceremony. After the wedding ceremony was over, guess what happened? The bride and the groom walked to the back of the church, and they were going to greet all of those who came to their special day. I was so glad to not stand in line with blue jeans and a country and western shirt. I nearly made you might say a fatal mistake by dressing the way that I thought I should dress. I didn't pay attention to the invitation. I think that's what this parable is about. Jesus extends us an invitation. We don't have to do a whole lot other than respond and do what he says to do. Mark 16:16 tells us Jesus' words, "He who believes and is baptized will be saved." That's a choice. You can choose to or not. It's up to you. I almost made a really big mistake by choosing to go just as I am. And you know how that would have looked if I had showed up like that. I'm glad that a little voice told me to pay attention to the invitation. This morning, I don't know where everybody's at, but I do believe that Christ is coming back, and it's going to be a wedding feast like none other. I have done what I need to do, and I hope you have too. But if you haven't, now is a good time. It's not the only time, but it is a good time to respond to the invitation as Randy leads us in Amazing Grace. Please be standing.